for organizing and bringing in the speaker.
But she's something. We had yesterday Rotary. We had the editor of Minneapolis St. Paul magazine talk, and other than I screwed up her PowerPoint presentation, it went very well.
Did you see that? It just came out, the article on that road trip down south.
She gave us copies of the magazine, and I saw it last night. But at my age, I was too tired to read it. Was it good?
It was. Carol and I are going to do that on Friday.
Ah, fabulous.
So
you'll have to report back to the group.
Pardon me?
You'll have to report back to the group.
I'll let you know, but it sure looks fabulous.
I've got the magazine also, but where is what's the article about? What road trip?
Go ahead, Dan.
No, you answer because you're the one who brought it up.
It's Red Wing down to Winona.
Uh-huh.
And you do the bluffs on the Wisconsin side and then come back the Minnesota side.
Oh, done that multiple times. It's great.
It just looks so pretty.
Yep. But I want to let you know we are live. So, and it is 7:02. And people tend to hop off early. So,
well, then we'll start. Because teacher says we better get going. So
I appreciate the community building, and I don't want to be too draconian about that.
So I have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
No, I need a motion.
I move to approve the agenda. Is that better?
I need a second.
Steve, you're on mute, but I think it was Steve.
It was Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes from the meeting of September 23rd.
May I have a second? I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Stephanie, go ahead.
Janet just emailed, and she needs a link to the meeting. So I know if I forward it to her, she may not get it.
September 23rd and look for
I'm going to forward to her right now.
Okay.
I got it in an email.
Okay, so I will. Thank you.
It's coming from me.
Okay. So, Merritt, do you want to take it away?
I'm open and ready to receive, Stephanie.
Okay. Go for it.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm noticing that it's almost getting to the point where it's going to be dark when we start our meetings again. Hopefully we can wrap this up by the darkest day of the year on our task force work. I thought maybe we should start, since it's almost the freshest thing possibly that everybody's gotten, on any questions, comments on the email that you sent out, I guess it was yesterday afternoon, Stephanie, or yesterday morning, on the engagement piece. I mean, that's always an important piece, and sometimes it is at the end once the people dropped off. So, why don't we just see if there's anything we want to talk through on that? Stephanie, I don't know if you want to provide any background or if we just want to jump in. And how many folks got to see the email?
Mary, you have some weird feedback. Do you have a headset or something? Because there's a rattling noise when you talk. It's gone away. No, maybe it was someone else. All right, so I'll let you know that Lisa Schaefer, the assistant manager, MJ, Merritt, and I met, and then a few days later, Scott Lisa, MJ, and I met to discuss the community engagement piece because it keeps coming up, and wanting to know how to address it and what the leadership intentions were and how to move forward. And that email is the result of those meetings.
That was very clear and straightforward. Thank you, Stephanie.
And so if there are any questions, feel free to, whether now or later, talk to me.
So Stephanie, just in summary, the task force asked for a community engagement survey. You took that request back to Lisa, MJ, Scott, and you mentioned someone else I hadn't heard before.
Lisa, maybe that's the one you hadn't heard. Yeah.
And although we've requested it, you as a leadership group or as city administration had said, that's not how we want to move forward. And we're not going to engage in a community survey now. And that's where we're at.
Right. So what has happened is the task force in and of itself, the city council created this task force to try to get more community input into the chapter 4 of the comp plan and housing in general. And so the task force, by its very nature, is the city's version of community engagement. And so it's kind of like creating a focus group and then having the focus group create multiple focus groups if it goes down the line. And so you are the community engagement for the city council, since the city council created the task force.
So not speaking for everyone else on the task force, but personally, I think that it should be bigger than this. Than just this task force, that the decisions are so significant for the city and the strategy moving forward that it should be more broadly communicated and engaged. And I guess maybe we just agree to disagree at this point.
Well, but I do want to clarify something. You're proposing, you're making recommendations. You're not proposing like strong differences in policy that the city council is at this point going to now pass or a thumbs up or thumbs down to. You are proposing recommendations for ideas to move forward. So the city council takes those recommendations, and if they are going to consider moving forward with some of them or all of them, then they can decide at that point to do a different type of community engagement prior to passing a policy. So your report are a bunch of recommendations that you want them to consider, and now it's their job to consider them, to take them in, and then figure out how to address them.
Right. And we're saying, or some of us are saying, as part of that consideration, we should get broader community engagement. And right now, staff is saying, no, that's not the right step. So we're not going to recommend that going forward, or we're not going to support it, or we're not going to fund it. It's not going to happen.
Right, and in part because we have lots of task force, and so we have a process and a protocol that is adheres to all the task forces, and so there's a system in place how actions and recommendations move forward. And so there's some consistency between the various task forces. This is not the only one.
And we can still include in our report a recommendation for community engagement. And we can focus it on specific issues if we choose to do that.
Exactly. You can say, recommend that the city council engage further with the community on, to determine the outcome of these 4 or 5 topics.
Just to be clear, early in the discussion, there was a question about whether or not there would be funding for a survey, and then we got an answer back that said yes, there would be budget for a survey, which I thought was a tacit approval of a survey would be okay. This appears to me to be a reversal of that decision.
Well, I can understand why there would be that perspective for sure. Part of it is, although we have multiple task force now, the concept of a task force is still relatively new. And so some of the protocols and procedures are evolving. And there's tightening up on what community engagement means and how it is carried out and who carries it out. And the force will not be policy level task force are not necessarily the ones that will be carrying out the surveys.
Bottom line from your paper is that the only community engagement will be those denoted on item number 4, next steps. Is that correct?
Well, you are in community engagement. The fact that you've been meeting for 18 months, countless numbers of hours, gaining boatloads of material that other people in the community don't have because they haven't dived this deeply into this topic. You are community engagement, for one. Gathered information. You went out into, talked to developers, you've talked to other stakeholders, you've talked to multiple people. That is a form of community engagement. And so you embody, by your coming together and the work you've done, community engagement. And also, but additional folks, so the Planning Commission, I don't know how many people are on the Planning Commission, also residents of Edina, as is the Housing Foundation. And they will have additional review of the final report and provide feedback, but yes. But I don't want to discount the role you're playing in the concept and the idea of community engagement.
Let me interject something here. You're both correct, but if we had heard this, Stephanie, when Norm first brought this up, the sequence would have made sense. So Norm's question is, you brought this up, we wanted to do it. It seemed like there was some momentum to do it. And for 1,000 reasons, okay? But we were going down that path, now we're not. If you had told us at the very beginning, okay, you are the community engagement, if you make proposals to the city and the city decides, hey, we like these, we'll go out and do further engagement, hold public hearings, that would make sense. So it's a sequence that's left us high and dry. Let me just figure. So, unless Norm has something else to say here, we're beating a dead horse because it's not going to happen. And I don't mean it pejoratively. We're not going to do the community engagement. So, Norm, if you want to say something else, please go ahead. But I think we should move on.
I agree. Let's move on.
Okay.
I think we should, at some point in Stephanie, in your next steps, we need to broaden that. So, for example, I know it's controversial, but where do we get input from? We Can Do Better, Edina, or whatever that group is. Where do we present this to the people that the broader community that may have a different opinion? How do we do that? If we're not going to do a community survey, how do we engage groups that may have different perspectives on this?
That is up to staff and city council. So you are proposing options for addressing housing. As the city council moves forward with implementing any of those proposals, they will need to get that type of buy-in.
So you're saying that we can't, you don't want us to take this to other groups outside of the Human Rights and Relation Commission, the Planning Commission, the Edina Housing Foundation. You've established this is the group that the city wants to go to.
Those are the city tied. The commissions are city groups comprised of volunteers. The We Do Better Together Edina is an and I don't know their total organizational strategy, but it seems it's kind of like, I think, Edina's Neighbors for Affordable Housing, where it's a private, ad hoc, loosely formed organization, if it's even an organization. I know that there's a steering committee with Ina. I don't know if there's a steering committee and directors with We Do Better Together Edina, or it's more just a loosely based web site with some people behind it. And a lot of people that tap into the website and are, get their postings. But anyway, it's not a city group.
Yeah, well, it's a community engagement group, whether it's formed under the auspice of the city or not administration or not. It is some broader community engagement group that I believe that and others should have the ability to weigh in on what we're doing and finding as part of broader community engagement.
Right. They would weigh in if policies are being brought forth.
And I'm saying
your
audience
is the city council. You're doing this for the city council. You're giving some advice to the city council. And the city council then decides what they're going to move forward, what policies they're going to do, and then it's their job to get broader community support.
Well, this is Bernadette. I guess I'm like in the minority here, but I totally agree with that decision by the city. I feel like I'm not really interested in going and getting yelled at by my neighbors or whatever. I don't want to do that. So anyone else who wants to get after it. But to me, I think we've spent a lot of time working on it. We put together a collective recommendation document. The city council does with it what they wish. I feel like I need to personally go out there and stick my neck out and, fight with my neighbors or whatever about this, because or go and have nobody show up because it's COVID or whatever. I mean, I think it's a weird time to do community engagement given where we are in the world, and so on ice anyway, just given that. And then having it facilitated through the channels of the people that are going to be the ultimate decision makers, vetting the report before they finalize and adopt it, to me makes a lot more sense than having a group of volunteers go out there and go through this. I just visualizing like a next door conversation in person, and I just absolutely want no part of that. So if others want to do that, great. I will not participate, and I'm glad that the city has moved away from that.
I just want to jump in here because I've sort of been an observer to this conversation as it's evolved. And it's my impression that when City Council first initiated, the task force, it has spent a ton of detailed time imagining exactly what engagement would look like for this group. And as the group has gone along and there have been conversations about this group and engagement and with other new task forces and committees, I think they're beginning to sort of evolve and better understand the role that plays or the form of engagement and at what stages it happens. I think that at this point, what's been put forward makes sense. Completely decoupled from this topic, I think any form of public engagement over the next, 8 to 10 weeks is going to be amplified by the political angst that so many people are feeling. So I don't think we'd have the best conversations probably. But I think you guys have a lot to think through and recommend to the city council and the staff as you wrap this up and sort of how you feel the process has gone overall for the task force. What would have been more helpful? What would have been helpful to know at the get-go as you went along, expectations for the end? Because I think you have a lot of value to provide through your experience so that they can be more intentional in how they set up committees and task forces moving forward. Because it's a learning process and it's never, these groups are never easy. And you should put together a recommendation that's in the report about how you think people and organizations should be engaged moving forward around housing.
That's exactly it. It is an evolving concept in the time of COVID. So a year ago, when this was first coming up, or even in January, prior to COVID, the options were what we were envisioning was probably very different, and COVID hit, and we evolved with what our understanding of engagement, and we're streamlining. There's a whole PowerPoint that was suggested that I share with you. I said we don't have time to do that right now, but I am willing to share it with you about how we are starting to think about community engagement as a city, and have it be across all task forces and commissions. So I do think that I'm willing to have, again, maybe offline conversations since it's 7:22 and we still have a report to write. So if you're willing to move on and talk about the report, and Joe, I'm more than happy to have more conversation with you.
I think we should move on.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jen.
All right. Well, Stephanie, if you could pull up, I think the next thing it would be helpful to turn to, I'll go in reverse order of what was sent to people, so what might be freshest in their mind. Yesterday, I had sent a kind of proposed reorganization for the goals and strategies for the report. That was in the meeting folder for today. I have my Google Doc version open. I'm wondering if you can open it and we can go through and discuss it, and you take notes like you did last time, which I thought worked really well.
All right, I need to enlarge you guys because you end up in a tiny little box. Let me see. View, you like it to be about 150. Okay, is this one?
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I hope people had a chance to look at it. I won't have each of you admit whether you reviewed it or not on our live public video, but you guys are pretty good at this, so I assume most people had a chance to look. I noticed that Steve already provided comments. So what I did was try to look at consolidating to fewer overall goals, sort of big goals, which had been part of our conversation last week, that we had 10 goals, when we're talking about setting up kind of the backdrop of the report and the data that then makes the case for the goals. I think the thought was, the goals probably could be grouped in a way that it would be easier to address kind of the setup for them in the report. And what would those groupings be? So I started with what had been one of the recommendations, which was to bring some of the housing specific, like types of housing we need under one goal. And it was suggested that that could be promote life cycle housing. So as we go through this document, what I've done is I've reorganized things and reordered them. And then after every goal or sub-goal item, I've noted what it was in our prior organization, what goal it was. So everything is still there. And you'll see I added a couple things later on. So for goal 1, I believe we have 4 sub-goals that moved under it. Promote affordable and attainable housing, support missing middle, promote special needs, and encourage preservation. So in each of those cases, I just grabbed what was under those goals, turned them into sub-goals under life cycle housing. And if you can just scroll down a little bit more. So that was it. I didn't even make, you can go back. I didn't even make any suggestions in that part. I just did that organization. So I guess I'd like to go one by one. Do people think this makes sense?
Well, I'll go since I've already made a comment here that I like this reorganization of the goals. Just having 4 goals simplifies the reader's tasks and makes the work feel more focused. I personally prefer eliminating the phrase sub-goal just because I think it simplifies the reader's task and just make it goal 1 and then 1A, 1B, 1C.
Yeah.
I support what Steve said. I think this makes it much clearer and an easier report probably to read and go through. I would change some of the language, which we probably don't need to do here. And I would, in goal number 1, I would take the 4th goal, encourage preservation of diverse housing stock, and make that the first bullet in goal 1. Seems like it's the bigger piece, right, of the strategy. And then the others could be viewed as sub pieces of that, right? Types of housing under the bigger umbrella of preservation of a diverse housing stock.
Well, I think D is about preserving what exists, and the other 3 are about what to focus on when adding new. If you do put it first, I think it elevates that preservation is an important part of a housing strategy. You know, don't take for granted what you already have, which, as we talked about last week, there's probably more housing diversity than some people might realize in Edina, and that has value. But curious what other people think about rearranging. I'm not sure that, I don't think I'd be on for doing the rest as sub-goals since they're all new housing.
I would rearrange it, say, all right, we're encouraging preservation of what we have, and again, we can wordsmith it, right? But we have a diverse housing stock today. Right. That's important.
I agree with Joe. I think it also could be and promote our diverse housing stock, again, just kind of from an educational point of view, in the sense that I was just dropping my son off at soccer last night down in Dewey Hill, and there's so many condos down there. There's so much multifamily down there. I mean, it's quote unquote prestigious Dewey Hill, so I guess it's fancy, but there's townhomes and condos and apartment buildings, and nobody really talks about that part of town, so I think there's all these different areas where we have this stuff that is getting people really hot and frustrated. It's already there. So I think understanding that and making sure that our elected officials understand that and they have the right talking points around it is a really important part of our housing goal and strategy, is to talk about Edina's housing stock in its existing diversity, so that people don't feel like it is predominantly single family, but for us have had the wisdom and foresight to include these other housing types, and we want to continue that pattern. We're not diverging from something that never happened in the past, is my opinion. So I agree with, that's a long-winded way of saying I agree with Joe.
And I agree with Joe as well, and Bernadette. Yes, we do have diversity. It's just not amplified very well sometimes, but yes.
Hey, Stephanie, as far as I'm concerned, you can just turn on suggesting feature so that you don't have to go through and do special formatting. Or, any other thoughts on these items under goal 1? It sounds like there's comfort with moving D to be the starting one. And I really like the idea of the concept of promoting, which is really raising awareness about what's already in the city today. And it may be then that there should be a strategy under this that specifies what promote means.
Right, and I think there's a lot that the city has put in place, like rental licensing and other things that will help the city to gather some of that data so they can better understand and have that quantify that you know, and map perhaps. I mean, I think maps really are always something that it's a good way to give a quick snapshot of the community and to kind of show where different types of housing are and what they look like and how long they've been there. There's all sorts of ways that you can use mapping. And that's a nice way to quantify it. And you can put that on the website so people can understand it and understand that it, you know, it's not necessarily quite as divergent as you might think if you haven't analyzed what, you know, the existing land use patterns and that sort of thing.
And I think we'll do part of that promoting and part of that exposition of the data in our lead up to this set of goals. So what Bernadette just described, we can actually build into the report. If you look back at the 2006 succession plan, they did that in a very similar way, where they actually had maps and they called out where all of the existing affordable housing units were.
And I don't even think, I mean, I think that's one map, but I think also there's the maps of, you know, where are the historic, you know, where are the smaller lots in the community, where is existing townhome development, where are their existing duplexes, whether they're market rate or not, you know, they could be worth, people be paying $2 million for them, but I think it's to understand just from a built form point of view too, where these different types of housing are located, like the missing middle sort of thing.
So you guys said maps data by housing type, lot size, and what was the third one that you said, Steve? Affordable housing units.
Yep.
Right, affordability level.
And I think rental versus ownership, you know, where rental properties in town versus owned properties, not necessarily just affordable, but.
Yeah.
We have either those maps already exist or they would be relatively easy to create from the data that we have.
Yeah, and Stephanie, there's a person at the city, right? She's like their GIS person. I mean, I don't want to monopolize her time or anything, but I mean, I think.
Oh, I'm fine with that. I can monopolize her time. Yes, she has created for me an affordable housing map. We also have a map with housing values. That one gets a little bit more sensitive because if people are going to enlarge it, they can see what the value of their neighbor's house is because it is by lot. So it does we'll have to figure out how to make it a little bit more anonymous.
You can just go on Hennepin County and look up the value of your neighbor's house. I mean, it's all public information.
That is true.
Stephanie, there is a GIS tool for being able to show the data that generalizes it over a number of lots.
Yeah. So we do have some of that information already. We have maps of that already, but we can definitely create more.
Can you share those 2 maps you just described to this task force without making them publicly available?
Well, they would have to be publicly available if anyone wanted to ask for them, but sure, I'm more than happy to.
Great. I just want to make sure I don't duplicate some effort that you've already gone through.
Oh, my goodness, Steve, no, don't. That's hard work. I mean, that's very time consuming. Don't do it.
Yeah. I just want to know what you've got so that I can make sure I don't do it.
Let's let him do it because I want to see what he can do.
I know. Making maps is intellectually stimulating and rewarding. So if it makes Steve happy, I think we should support Steve. All right. Any other comments on this goal 1 rearrangement? And I just put a placeholder for a strategy about promoting awareness. If anybody has language in their mind at the moment they quick want to throw out, please do so. Otherwise, I can noodle on it and put something in there later on. All right, let's move to goal 2. So goal 2, I put these under the header, investigate land use regulation, and tried to pull in things that were related to regulating land, which is essentially zoning. And then I broke it down by items. So let me say here, I split up the items under goal 7. They're in a different order now. They got a new A, B, C, D, so I can't remember the original order, but I split them between what I saw as zoning standards that are related to the design of homes, and then zoning that's related to land use, what's allowed in different districts, and where those districts are located. So the first one is adjust zoning standards for housing, and then the second is consider zoning district amendments. And then under adjust zoning standards for housing, I added one, which was more obliquely referenced in another goal around removing some of the hurdles. And it was parking. So I thought that maybe it should move here, or it should be more explicitly stated here to complement what there is later on. So that was to adjust off-street parking standards to better enable market demand to allocate spaces based on housing type and location. And I'm not saying that that wording may have much room for improvement, but I think you get the idea. And Stephanie, can you just scroll down? Yeah. Oh, and there's one more for goal 2. And this was former goal 6. And it was encourage housing to support and be supported by transit. So again, that seemed to me like it was a bit more regulatory because it's really related to land use. So in that case, I suggested new wording. Allow greater housing density near activity nodes and transit. I brought in the first strategy, and then I added a second one, which is the transition areas concept that was introduced in the comprehensive plan, and which I think this group talked about and, thought made sense that you have a bit more of a transition in scale and use between commercial districts and single family.
Merritt, my only comment on all this, and I think it's great work, is that we should try to use the terminology that's actually in the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
So when we say activity nodes, that's new terminology. In the commercial, in the comp plan, it would have been neighborhood nodes.
Okay.
Or areas of opportunities for change. So there's some language that already exists, and we shouldn't create new language because it'll just confuse people.
So what was it called? Neighborhood?
They were called neighborhood nodes.
Okay.
Was one way of identifying the potential areas for change. And those neighborhood nodes were then the focus of the small area plans. So 44th in France, 50th in France, Cahill and 70th were all identified as neighborhood nodes. And there was a small area plan developed for them.
Wasn't there a term about transition zones?
Well, there is a term for that. And I think Tom has been pretty straightforward in saying he doesn't like that phrasing. It's convenient shorthand language, but it has connotations that may be negative for some people. So I think we're better off using the more neutral terms like potential areas for change or neighborhood nodes.
Okay.
So we're going to have to wordsmith this some more, but I just want to make sure we try to use the same language that was used in the comp plan.
Transition areas has a totally different meaning than potential areas for change.
Yes, it
And I
does.
think that the idea of whether we use the term transition or not, I don't, but I think that that concept is an important one to show that there is an area that can be used as a buffer between two very different areas, such as multi-family high-density housing and single-family housing.
Yeah. Tom, you're still on the call. Do you want to make a comment?
So this is Joe. I struggle with this goal too. In general, I like goal 1 as I think about the final report. I struggle with including this as a goal, investigating land use regulation. I think goal 3 starts to set a strategy. But I personally struggle with including goal 2 as a goal. I mean, I think these could be components of other goals, but I think land use regulation as a goal, right? Are we saying, hey, we should, what does investigate land use regulation mean? Are we really saying open up land use regulation? We're encouraging the council to review all land use regulation? What are we saying here?
Can you put up my language, Stephanie? You typed in here, Steve suggested a different title. Can you actually either go to the box where I suggested a different title or actually type it in? I can't see it anymore, so I can. I don't think that's what I suggested.
What did you suggest, Steve?
It was in a different document. I was trying to compare 2 documents that were being edited.
This document, but I will see if I can find it in my.
Did you send it in an email, Steve?
Yeah, I will.
I agree though with Joe that I don't know if investigate is the right word. And I know Merritt, you just threw these up here as, for discussion purposes. I like the idea of kind of having land use kind of together and grouping those goals together. I totally understand the sensitivity. I'm not a big regulation person either, so I don't like the idea of promoting additional regulation. But I think, I don't know if it's, intentional land use regulation or something like that, where it's like, where we understand that there needs to be some, but it needs to be very strategic, as opposed to just kind of like, we're going to solve all these problems by regulating our way out of it or whatever. I don't like that connotation. So And in addition to the fact that it makes it sound like it's not there right now, like we're investigate adding it or something. So I think it just needs to be, we just need to words and figure out a different way of phrasing it to kind of group all these land use goals together. But I like the concept of it.
I agree, Bernadette, and this was language. Everything that's in black is language that the task force had already signed off on, but I agree. I think this title could be better articulated, particularly because what's really being suggested is deregulation. I mean, everything that's suggested would loosen up the level of restrictions, specifically on some of the design requirements that would make them less strict, like allowing less parking as a minimum, or allowing more types of housing choice in certain areas of the city. And I'm not a big fan of the term regulation either. So does anybody have suggestions how to capture this? I mean, I have ways I would say it, but I also come to it with a lot of jargon and planner speak in my head. So.
This isn't the best word, but in essence, we're saying relax use regulation.
I know that last time we were talking about this goal, there was a different terminology we used, and I can't put it, but was one which we crossed out to replace it with investigate. So I guess we're going back and forth on that.
Hope you're on mute. Merritt, you're talking.
Yeah, it could also be something like expand housing options by addressing land use regulation. I don't know.
What if it was just something like land use?
Well, I think in the other goals, we've had sort of a verb activity. So like encourage, promote. So it's, what is that verb? And then we can change land use regulations. We can call it something else. But essentially this is all about zoning of standards and where things are allowed to go.
So to your earlier point, what if it was, instead of promote life cycle housing, it was simply life cycle housing? And then goal number 2 is land use.
What other people think about that?
Well, I think that works because the action verb is in the actual sub goals. So the way Joe is saying it makes for a very simplified heading. So if you want to know what the goals are for land use regulation, it's 2A through 2C. I think that's an adequate way of addressing this.
How about to update?
Well, so just for a moment, let's go back to that idea that for each goal, big goal header, let's start with, we would remove the action words. So the goals would be.
I completely disagree with that approach. We have been over this several times. And the idea is to make a declarative statement about what we're trying to encourage. So if we want something to happen, we don't want to use a generic term like life cycle housing. We're saying we want to promote life cycle housing, which has a totally different meaning. The same thing with land use regulation. It would be promote diverse housing stock through revised land use regulation. We have an intention that we're putting forward. It's not simply a category of thoughts.
We're adequately showing our recommendations in the sub goals, and so in the interest of making this simpler, I'm okay with removing the action word goal. We're covering the recommendations in the sub goals.
You're assuming that the reader is going to be engaged as you are in reading first the overall heading and then going on and reading each of the sub goals and understanding, okay, yeah, they were action oriented as opposed to they had this category. I think we need to be declarative. I think we need to be putting a stake in the ground that we're trying to get something to happen. If we say we want to reduce building costs, we should say that rather than building costs.
Anybody else on the task force have some thoughts on this?
I
Oh, sorry.
Janet?
I don't have the right terminology, but this is a critical part based on where we are, even just with the COVID-19. Many businesses are going to change the physical part, so we need to really be strategic with this goal in terms of the spaces that are going to be vacant because the old model business for those retails has changed, provides opportunity for those spaces to be changed. So I am going to be really, I don't know what the action word to be yet, but update land use, whatever, we need to have that flexibility in there because I can see in the horizon that space is going to come up because we are just in a very different environment with COVID having happened and everything is changed. So land use is very likely to take on a different way of how we use it, whether it is for commercial, residential, or industrial. So I like to leave it more flexible. But I don't have the right time yet.
Okay. But you want the goal, Janet, to be to do something, not just a category.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Technically, a goal would have an action word. Otherwise, it's just a topic. So if you do remove the action word, I think we would say topic 1, 2, 3, 4, and then goals A, B, C, D, E.
Hey, can I make a suggestion here? Because if we've already spent 4 minutes on this, and I'm not we should decide whether we want these to read with an action or just a heading and move on. Otherwise, we're not going to get anything done. So I'm all for correct word. For instance, instead of investigate land use, relax land use regulations. I'm not suggesting that, but I think we should have that verb in there. Anybody else?
I like the idea of an action word and I don't know about relaxing. That could be a sensitive term, but
No, I agree. I just want to know if we got a majority here that want the verb in there. So we've got two, we got three.
I'm a verb guy. I'll go for verb.
Yeah.
I vote for verbs.
Okay. Let's move ahead.
So Dan, are we including verbs or not?
Yes. Yes. You've been stomped by the majority. I forgot where we were.
You're looking at what's under goal 2.
Okay.
Yeah, so, sorry. So under goal 2 for the 2 sub-goals, are people comfortable with those being split as I've done?
I'm comfortable with that.
It makes sense to people? Okay. What about calling out explicitly off-street parking standards as a strategy?
I think that's good because it's kind of open, but on the other hand, one of the issues that when we talked to developers was all the covered or underground parking that gets expensive, and is it all going to be needed over the next 20 or 40 years? So this is kind of flexible and adjust off-street parking. So
To me, I don't know, parking in the suburban context is a real sticky wicket, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yes, there's always going to be a portion of the population that's going to take transit, and maybe if we improve transit, more people will take it. But realistically, for the commercial to be, particularly to be viable, you're going to need parking, especially with all the hits that commercial has taken due to COVID. I don't know. To me, I think maybe if we just have some vague language about allowing there to be creative solutions or something, I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind is technology is going to change, building technology is going to change, that sort of thing. So as going, not to beat a dead horse on the top one, but I think one of the things that I think what we're trying to say is we want dynamic or flexible, or, we want our land use regulation to be intentional and dynamic so that it's meeting the needs of today, and it's not draconian and it unintentionally that we want to have happen difficult to have happen. So we need to allow for some ability for it to be revised, constantly updated, within reason. So I don't know, something about parking, I think adjust or allow creative off-street parking solutions, including shared parking or, uses where maybe the timing is different so that, it's used during the day and at the night. So we don't have parking lots sitting empty or whatever, I mean, I think there can be some things that don't necessarily mean that people are going to be, parking in each other's front yards. And so I don't know. I think I like parking. I just think there should be something that speaks more to creativity and market dynamics than just adjusting.
I think Bernadette made some very good points, especially around the shared parking concept. That was a big deal at 44th and France, or a goal. So, yeah.
I like that too. I think that, how do we not limit what we're trying to say here, right? We're saying, let's look at that, or we're recommending that. We're not just saying adjust off-street parking. Isn't it a little bit bigger than that? So I don't know what the right words are, but I don't know that we need to. I don't believe we need to figure that out right this minute.
Well, I think the big question is, are you, and I think it is, that you're encouraging more flexibility in what the standards are. That's agreed upon, right? And then you're leaving it up to the council and staff to figure out how to interpret flexibility and code revisions. Is that right?
And I would think we'd want to be stronger than that.
Okay.
Or my personal view is we would want to be stronger, right? So taking this specific example, it's not just, it is, hey, the feedback we've gotten is the parking, off-street parking standards don't work and don't apply for many of the projects that are being proposed. They exist. So are we saying change it?
What Joe, if I could press on a point, they don't work, meaning what?
Meaning from a developer's perspective.
You mean financially?
Financially, they don't work.
But many things don't work financially, but they're imperative. So I think we should be careful here. It's costly to do underground parking, okay, but much of it is appropriate because of its impact on the surrounding neighborhood. So we could have a proposed development where the developer could say, I've got 100 units here. I can only afford to build 10 underground parking stalls, but then it doesn't work for the neighbors. So it's not that it doesn't work. What we should concentrate on is not requiring something, in this case parking, that's not adding to the value of the development.
I agree with that. But does this say it, right?
So I don't know if we want to have, I think it's hard to say that doesn't add to the value of the development, because that can vary so much in interpretation. But for instance, there are very specific parking standards that people are changing these days. For instance, they allow affordable housing projects, say, to reduce the minimum required parking by 25% or 50%, or they allow reductions in minimum parking within a certain distance from transit, or some places are just getting rid of parking requirements altogether. So if you want to be a little bit more specific, or just make the point that addressing off-street parking standards is an important part of the equation and allowing more flexibility if you want to encourage more housing choice. Steve?
Just two thoughts. One is that the Planning Commission has already been charged by the City Council with revising the off-street parking standards. So we're essentially putting something in here that's going to happen almost immediately after we recommend it. So I think that's a great thing. It'll look like we were very smart and we're way ahead of the game in putting this in here. But beyond that, I think if we use something like provide zoning flexibility to adjust off-street parking standards, we give them the wiggle room that they need. That says, yes, we will case by case, we'll figure out what's the impact on the neighborhood and what's the impact on the developer, and move forward as appropriate in each circumstance. So just as we want you to think about this, we think there's room for improvement.
Are people comfortable with you?
I am.
Yes.
All right. All right, why don't we move down to goal 3?
Someone, if I missed it, the typo under sub-goal 3C, it's 2C, correct?
Sorry, yeah, 2C.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Goal 3, reduce building costs. Reduce building costs. This was a new generic title that I put in. So what it puts under it is goal 8 and I believe 9. Each of these had a lot of strategies. You guys had put a lot of work into these, and it represented a chunk of the engagement you did with stakeholders. So I think if we scroll down,
Thank you, Stephanie.
pardon me, but I've got a question on sub-goal 2C. We didn't discuss that. And do we have areas where greater housing density is needed that's not already addressed in the comprehensive plan?
Yes.
And those are?
France between 62 and 44. Valley View between 62 and Highway 100. And Vernon between 169 and Tracy.
Would you feel comfortable even stating where those areas are?
Well, I think that's part of what we'll do in our setup of the mapping, where we'll be able to show that there's existing housing that's already zoned that way, and the zoning just could be easily extended in those areas. And those were areas that were identified in the 2008 comprehensive plan as areas for potential change, but they were not included. They were sort of tangentially included in the 2018 plan.
Yeah, and did you mention France between like 54th and 62?
Well, it actually, yeah, I said 44th and 62 because
Oh, okay, 44th. Yeah, okay, that's great. Okay. Yeah, because I think one of the things, if there's details such as that, I think that would be appreciated.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, Steve, I just want to capture them here. So I put in parentheses, consider extending areas of potential change with zoning for housing. France, what are the other two?
France, Valley View, and Vernon would be the simplest way of saying it.
Okay. And then to represent this with nothing in the report.
Merritt, this is Tom Kuhn. Could we go up just a little bit when we talked about the ADUs? There was a phrase there that I had a concern about. Under ADU.
Where?
Well, you were scrolling up and down, and it was near the before the zoning discussion.
Yeah, so it's in goal 1.
Yeah, that's it. Such as no. Go further down. Keep going down.
It's in 2B as item E.
Yeah. 2B, yeah. Anyhow,
okay.
You're saying with one of the units being owner occupied, what if you sell the property? I would say that potentially or most likely one of the units is owner occupied, but I wouldn't say it's categorically flat because, there could be a situation where both units get rented out at some point with a subsequent owner or something.
I think this was discussed at the last meeting, and there was some strong feeling that to have one of the units owner occupied, because then it's like to avoid having a big rental block.
But then what if the property turns over for some reason they have to rent out both units? Would you not permit that?
It wouldn't be zoned properly.
Right.
It would not be permitted. So I think I mentioned that I worked in a number of communities, and some of them had the owner occupied requirement, some didn't. But in the one that did, it meant one of the units on the lot at all times had to be owner occupied. So if there was a sale of the property by an owner, then they'd bring in a new owner, but you couldn't rent both. It's like the same zoning rules around home occupation. You can qualify as a home occupation and have a business and a house, but you can't do that if it's not an owner occupied house.
I struggle with that, and here is why. I mean, if we already have single-family homes that are being rented out, why are we qualifying that specifically? I know of a friend. They live in close on the France Avenue. Beautiful home. She has moved out to Uptown in Minneapolis, and she rents out her home to some expat. So the renting part is already out there. So there will be no uniformity. I guess we are going to have to drill out which homes can be rented out and which ones can't. And if we are trying to say we don't want it to be into the business of tightly regulating things, that's what we are trying to do right here. So, I mean, renting of single family home is already happening. So whether it's partially not, right now, there's someone I know who has rented out her whole home. So how different is that going to be with this one?
And maybe this group decides not to make a definitive statement on that and leaves that up as a policy decision, just says nothing on it. I mean, whether accessory dwelling units get allowed at all, well, are they allowed under some limitations now, Stephanie, in the city?
ADUs are not allowed at all right now.
Okay, so it's a big hurdle just to get ADUs to be allowed in a code, and certainly ownership is going to come up as part of that. So you have to decide whether you, as a group, want to make a statement one way or the other on it, or just leave it open.
So ADUs are not allowed, but right now we are charged with trying to increase inventory and see how we do that. So we are proposing that. The fact that it's not allowed, that is in the plan. It's for this point going forward. So.
Hello, how about initially with an owner occupant? And what happens down the road is...
I'm sorry, I keep scrolling.
So you mean if it's at the time that an ADU, if they're allowed, at the time at which it's added, it would have to be owner occupied in order to be given approval to add it?
Correct.
Why do we care if it's owner occupied or not? I'm confused.
Steve, you're on mute. I'll unmute you. There's been so much background noise somewhere.
So the idea here is that we're trying to get more types of housing so we can increase the amount of diverse housing stock. And one of those is accessory dwelling units. As Merritt pointed out, this is typically a huge hurdle. Very hard to get through in a lot of communities. People are very concerned about what kind of unit is going to go in, and is it going to be rental, and is it going to allow the riffraff in? So by putting in the phrase, the owner, one of the units has to be owner occupied, you make the overall concept more palatable. So I think it's just a selling.
I mean, I understand that, but we understand that, you know, basically that's like a racist and classist point of view that we're basically tacitly allowing and promoting people to have that sort of bias against people who choose to rent their homes, right? I mean, just as long as we acknowledge that, I mean, if you're screening and you're properly managing the place, it shouldn't matter if you're paying the mortgage or your renter is paying the mortgage through their rent.
Yeah, let's not broaden this concept to include all housing. You can rent your house rather than own it, and that's not an issue. It relates specifically to ADUs.
No.
So we're not
Right.
trying to make a blanket statement or take a blanket position across renting homes. You can rent homes. But 10% of homes in Edina are rented, so it's not a big deal.
Right, but I mean, just saying that you have to own the home to get an ADU. I mean, it has to be owner occupied, is saying that somehow if you choose to rent the home and have a little studio above your garage, that those people are somehow going to be more disruptive to the community than if it's an owner occupant. I mean, whatever, if that's what's going to get it approved, that's fine. I just feel like, you know, I don't want to use coded language that makes it seem like, you know, if we're not acknowledging what we're actually doing. If we know what we're doing and we're doing it with our eyes wide open, that's fine. But I guess my point of view is that I don't think there's any shame in renting or having two homes be a duplex be non-occupied by the owner and both sides rented. I don't think there's any problem, and I don't think Edina is particularly known for problem properties or that's a particular concern. People are concerned that by having someone rent a renter, that somehow it's going to ruin their property values of their neighborhood. You know, it's disappointing, but I guess it's, you know, it's understandable.
I do think there is, I completely agree with you, Janet and Bernadette, about the bias, the strong bias there is against renters. I do think there are certain people, or that one of the concerns is that the tenants may be okay, but an absentee owner won't ensure that the grass is getting mowed or exterior repairs are being made or things like that. So I think it's sometimes about irresponsible landlords not doing things that a renter couldn't be expected to do. But I think that concern is smaller than the unspoken bias against renters. And I do think if you put this in there, there will be people that like it, and there will be people that see it in the way that both Bernadette and Janet have pointed out.
Okay. I would move to strike it.
Would look at things differently. I don't think about a bias against renting or renters. I look at it as if you've got a neighborhood that's zoned for single family homes and you allow dwelling units on the property, it certainly is a way of providing a place for a mother-in-law or a close family member, but then that can move to be a rental facility. And it seems like to me like what we have done then is we have really changed the zoning from single family homes to two family homes. And that does have an implication in changing the neighborhood. And so I think it's appropriate to keep the phrase in there with one unit or occupied. And besides the fact we're talking about something that has generally in neighborhoods, in cities where it has been implemented, it has resulted in very few actual ADUs being implemented.
You're right.
You know, you could be silent on it because ultimately you're proposing the fact of ADUs.
Yes.
And the ultimate decision is going to be with the city council.
Yes.
You could be owner occupied, just not weigh in on that, and because the change isn't happening right now. It's a proposal, the recommendation.
And if you're silent on it, it doesn't imply that you're taking a position one way or the other. It means that you're not speaking on it.
I think that's a good way to go. I mean, in all practical, I think that at least initially, they're all going to be, one of the units will be owner occupied. And my point was just down the road, if things happen and somebody has to rent out both units. You know, actually, the mother-in-law might be the owner of the property, but she goes to the efficiency or the one bedroom and lets her grandchildren and children live in the big unit. So
I think we need to move on. It's almost 8:21. I do have a hard stop at a little before 9, which makes it less than a hard stop.
I suggest that we move on to 4, just because I think that 3, a lot of work's gone into, and 4, I think, needs a little bit more attention.
But Merritt, before we go on that, Stephanie, are you updating this document?
Yes. Merritt and I both are, yeah.
So if back to that area on Vernon, France, and Valley View, are we recommending that we're gonna, it said it keeps changing, right? We talked about R2 zoning. We're talking about increased density. Is that what we're supporting? Or are we supporting that those areas be reviewed?
Yeah. To Joe's point, can you go up just a little bit so that we can see goal 2F, sorry, 2BF, there, right there. It says develop small area plans for extending R2 zoning. So what we're suggesting as a strategy that they do some additional work to determine whether R2 zoning is appropriate. So we're essentially saying the same thing in F as we're now saying in B.
Right, and the way this reads is we're saying, hey, turn it into R2 zoning. Or are we saying these are areas that should be reviewed? I'm comfortable saying that these are areas that could be reviewed, but I'm not supporting that they're necessarily candidates for increased density.
Right, but the whole idea behind developing a small area plan says go through the very detailed process that involves lots of community input, gets all the neighbors involved, takes a year to 18 months to finish it. And at the end of it, you'll know whether
exactly
people are in support of it or not. So I think the whole idea there is to say we really want people to be very, very thoughtful about this extension. And we think it makes sense, but it needs to have community engagement and community support for it. And the only way you're going to get that is through that small area planning process.
Yes.
So let me ask a question then. Because F already has that sort of specificity, it also says evaluate additional areas. Then perhaps B is redundant. And in that case, should we just make to eliminate 2C and bring A as a last bullet under 2B? Because it really is related to land use decisions.
Can you scroll up to see what we're putting it under, Stephanie?
Consider zoning district amendments to expand housing options. And that may be too jargony. We may want to reword that at some point, but, so what 2B would include is, that the city decides that it should focus its changes on increased housing density near areas of transit.
What did I do?
Very nice editing. It's pretty impressive, Stephanie.
I have no idea what I did.
I think you did what I was suggesting. The question is, how do people feel about it?
Yeah, I think that the only thing we've done is diminish the importance of the idea of trying to link certain types of housing with transit. It's included. Point G makes the point, but it is point G, a long list. On the other hand, if we left it just as a standalone goal, we only have one strategy underneath it, and it looks a little bit weak. So I'm okay with it. I think the person who I would like to hear from is Tom.
On zoning,
Are you comfortable with G, Tom?
huh?
Are you comfortable with just putting G in as our reference to support development of housing
I mean,
with access to transit?
I do. I mean, it makes sense to me, because sometimes, and also the idea of, I think the transit will expand, and when you've got affordable housing, you tend to have people that have no car or one car, and if they need two modes of transportation, there's a backup. So yeah, and we do actually have good transit in some parts of Edina as far as fast transit.
This is not a judgmental question, but why would we want 100% affordable housing as opposed to housing that has a mix of market and affordable?
Well, I think there's different reasons. I like both because sometimes with affordable housing, if you have a really targeted audience that might need additional support services, or if you had a unit, something for the physically disabled who have a particular set of syndromes, or you may have some unique design features you want to put in.
Yeah, but that's a small minority.
Well, I know. What I wanted to go on. Also, I think there's, quite frankly, sometimes different management philosophies, and I've seen mixed income where the low income people are very discriminated against by management, or held to a higher standard than just because somebody's so worried that they're going to bring the whole building down with their behavior or something to that effect. Whereas 100% affordable, sometimes management understands some of the peculiarities that go on. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but I've had some very frustrating experiences in the past with some mixed income experiments if the manager on site is not sensitive, or they become they're much more stringent, too stringent in who they let in under the low income. They might just rent to a seniors only when it was really intended for families. And I'm sure Bernadette might have a thought on it, but.
Okay, so two things. One,
that's legal. So if somebody's doing that, that's totally against the law. So, you know, I mean, I think we should assume that when we're making regulations that other people are in compliance with the law. And if they're not in compliance with the law, then we deal with that specific situation instead of trying to regulate around people who are not complying with other laws. I mean, you can't discriminate. If someone's not practicing fair housing, that's a bigger, you know, I don't think that's the city of Edina's role to provide, to go around to try to create our own regulations because we think that there's going to be people that are, you know, breaking federal law. That, I mean, that's
Yeah, I wasn't saying they were breaking federal law in the sense that they were discriminating against people on race or a protected status.
Well, but if you're not renting to families, you're renting to seniors, that's absolutely fair. That's a fair, you can go to that, that's a fair housing finding and you will absolutely get fined and written up and that's illegal. You can't do that.
Somebody blows the whistle on you, yes.
Can I make a couple points here because I brought the issue up? So, one, there's not enough money to do all the affordable units the city's committed themselves to do, let alone the layer over that. Then you're going to try to do 100% affordable building. And then additionally, politically, it's much more difficult if you're going to have buildings that are 100% affordable. If you've got a 120 unit building, 10 or 20% of them are affordable, that's a much smaller hurdle to get over neighbors.
Dan, I would beg to differ in some respects, that if you want to get the numbers in, it's easier to have 100% affordable housing development because of the financing sources. You cannot do a tax credit deal that gets investor equity in the project if it's mixed income. Tax credit deals are for 100% affordable projects. So he does say mixed income and 100% affordable, so he doesn't the inclusionary policy in the statement. So
I would suggest just removing, I would just have preservation of affordable housing throughout Edina, because to your point, Stephanie, you know, whether it's mixed income or 100% depends on the developer and the funding sources. And if we're moot on the point, we're essentially saying the same thing, that, you know, we support affordable housing without limiting it by type. Preservation of. So what do people think of that, just removing it because it may not be adding much value?
I think by calling it out, we are acknowledging the natural tension that exists between financing and zoning or public perception. I would leave it in. It's just an acknowledgement that that's a natural tension that exists. And by not including it, we're not solving it. And I don't know that we're solving it by including it either, but at least we're acknowledging it.
I think it's not much of a statement without specifying what type of housing you're talking about.
Yeah, I didn't suggest
making a point here about access to transit, and the people who need access to transit are people generally who don't have the income to afford their own transportation.
Yeah, so, I just meant removing the term mixed income and 100% and just saying preservation of affordable housing.
Well, if it's preservation, we already have 100% affordable housing. There's at least 9 projects or developments, I believe, Stephanie. So, and just because you use transit doesn't mean you're low income. You might be environmentally conscious, or you might have an employer that makes you a sweet deal that it's free for you to get on the bus if you're like a federal employee. You know, as opposed, you know, In lieu of a stock option plan, we got that. So, you know, there's some people that like to ride the bus. I mean, I know I'm weird, but you know, you can play with your smartphone and let the bus driver price it to people.
Hey, Tom, I don't think the suggestion is that only people that live in affordable housing use transit.
Right. Well,
and I think perhaps support as it's stated right now, as Stephanie amended it. It may be some people would misinterpret it to mean that affordable housing should only be near places with transit, which I don't think is your intent. So it might just be, instead of support, it might be prioritize.
Right. I mean, and two, sometimes you can negotiate with the bus company to change the route or add a stop. That's been done in the past if the development is big enough or they think a market will be there.
I like Dan's thought that we're beating a dead horse. He used that term once before. I think we're probably in a place where we should stop on this one.
Yeah.
I just asked a question. I wanted some information. I wasn't prepared to change to it. So yes, we can move on. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so number 4 is really a new category about sustainable design. And as we had it, there was only one strategy under it. In this case, because we have this sub-goal pattern, I wrote a statement that would be the sub-goal, and then what the statement leading into what black is what was already there. And then red and blue are what I've suggested to move it into the format that we're using. But I think it's lacking oomph to be its own goal section, and that it should be, that there should be more in this.
So when I went through this and looked at, now I need to find it. When I looked at goal 3, reduce building costs, and then goal 4, sustainability, are we really saying reduce in goal 3? Is the intention that we're going to reduce building costs, or that we want to suggest changes to the development process within the city of Edina? So is it more about sustainable development through improved processes in goal 3, which you could then blend goal 4 into?
I didn't follow you, Joe. Did you say, is it really about reducing building cost?
I'm saying, is goal 3 really all about reducing building costs, or is it a broader spectrum, which is we're saying, hey, let's review the development process in Edina and let's promote sustainable, not from the perspective of environmental sustainability, but from the broader perspective of something that can continue on. So promote sustainable development.
This thought just came to me. There's tens of thousands of houses in Minneapolis that were built before 1900, okay? Apparently they were sustainable, right?
By definition.
So I do think, goal 3 is really reduce development / building cost where appropriate. But to bring up another dead horse, no sooner do we say reduce building cost, and then goal 4 is going to increase our building cost. Now there may be a good reason for it, but we're going 2 different directions.
So when you do
design necessarily in all forms requires an increase in building costs. Sometimes it means increasing density, which or building smaller or allowing no basements, or I mean, I think there's things that I think it's broadening. I like Joe's concept of broadening the word sustainable, because I think right now it's basically a word people use interchangeably for green building or LEED certification or whatever. And I think there's a lot of different ways that you can make your home sustainable or encourage sustainability that may or may not drive up the cost per se. But I think allowing flexibility around what sustainability means, reducing fees from the city, reducing government intervention where it's not necessary, those things make building more sustainable and potentially free up funds to do other things. I mean, everyone wants to reduce their operating costs, I would hope, by not paying extra for water or heat or other things like that. So, I mean, I think there's things that the city can encourage without mandating or incentivize. I mean, I think there's ways that we can be creative about what sustainability means, in the sense that we're encouraging structures that are not disposable and will be around for a while and will meet our needs for a while. So how do we balance that quality versus, over improving and adding, excessive costs? It's going to make it financially infeasible. So I like the idea of encouraging. I like the idea. I think it's revolutionary, actually, to put green building under or sustainability, or address that under the cost perspective, because I think that gets at the misconception or the reality that green building is expensive, and if we want that, then we're going to have to make trade-offs with other costs and fees so that we are achieving that goal, if it is in fact a goal and it doesn't just become lip service that we want green building. But how do we encourage people to build sustainable structures that are also feasible financially?
I just want to add something, because I've worked a lot in the past in this area. So there's a difference between the upfront construction costs and then the operational costs. So, a lot of green building features have a payback period between 3 and 7 years. Used to be longer for certain types of solar. So the investment is cost effective if it's being done by a person that will hold the property and realize the benefits of reduced energy expenses over time. It's not financially beneficial to someone that builds something and then sells it to somebody else. So say apartments and condos, if you're not going to stay in management, you just sell it. But what can happen in those instances, that Excel has programs, or the city could help with programs, where you essentially give some additional assistance, say for putting on the upfront investment of solar, and then whoever helped with that investment shares in the cost recovery in future years from utility bills. So I think talking about cost, it's important to differentiate between initial costs and operating costs, which, for instance, for an affordable home that you're building for people that they're going to live in for a while and pay utilities, making these upfront investments over time is cost effective.
I disagree with your premise. Whether you're building to hold or building to sell, the market is going to punish you if there's operating costs. So people who buy used existing apartment buildings don't buy them willy-nilly, not concerned. So if someone decided it was cheaper to build an apartment building and just put in electric heat, when they go to sell that, the buyer is going to go, you're not worth $200,000 a unit because I'm going to have additional operating costs because you chose to go electric heat. So it makes no difference whether someone's building to own or building as a spec. At the end of the day, the market's going to take care and put pressure on them to build something more sustainable than less.
I disagree to some of your points, Dan. Now, maybe in the case of an apartment, you may be correct if you have a sophisticated buyer, an honest buyer, or if you have somebody though that's going to sell it to a bunch of dentists down in Arizona, they might be able to get away with it. But I think if you're talking about single family homes or condominiums or townhouses, I don't think a lot of buyers think about that stuff. They look at the pretty kitchen, they look at things like that, and they should, but I don't think they do pay that much attention to the ongoing operating costs for them as a homeowner. So I do think that we need to have something stuck in there. Merritt, I wanted to make another comment about your goals and sub-goal. They don't.
I'm not going to stop you because Steve wants to make a comment on what we were talking about, and then we'll go back to you. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I just wanted to point out that the comprehensive plan has a whole chapter 8, devoted to the environment, and it covers a lot of the material that might go into this. I would be happy to go to chapter 8, see if there's some concepts that we want to essentially borrow from that to flesh this out so that we have both maybe a slightly differently stated goal and we have more strategies underneath it, and then bring this back to the group for further discussion. I think our point here is simply that we want to make sure that we acknowledge that there's a climate change crisis and that we want to do something to try to promote solutions. And that, so either we say, yeah, that's a good thing, we should be doing that, or we should say, no, let's just drop it. Let's let the environmental chapter and the comprehensive plan take care of it for us.
Well, I think we were supposed to show some coordination. My other comment was to Merritt. It seems like what you say in 4A and what you say in 4, you don't address rehab consistently. So they should be in both. And then I would say maybe substantial rehab, because what if somebody's rehab is they just need to put a new roof on and they want to update their kitchen? Does that trigger a lot of environmental issues? So I would just qualify the statement of rehab to somehow, at what point is it rehab and not just or substantial rehab? That's it.
Hey, Dan, can we take a vote on whether we want to include a goal relating to sustainability?
Yes, I would say no. Yes, we should take a vote, and my vote would be no.
Let's do a 5 to 5 so we can see everybody's position on this and go from there.
Well,
Steve,
I'm having technical difficulties, so you'll have to settle for my voice, but I'll give it a 5.
Okay. I'll go with 4.
So Steve, so I have different context on this. I think sustainability is critical, and I just think we should broaden the prior goal and include sustainability. Because in my view, it's not about lowering building costs. It's about creating an environment within the city of Edina that allows for better development practices or improved practices. And part of that is sustainability.
I think you're making an interesting argument, Joe. My one concern is that we have a lot of stuff jammed into the reduced cost goals. There's a lot of material there, and I don't think we want to just bury sustainability in there and sort of confuse the message. from all of our interviews, it seemed that people were very concerned that we were artificially driving up the costs and causing projects to fail by having overly complex development processes or requirements. So I want to address that issue separately from the issue of should we, as a community, be promoting sustainability?
So I agree with what you just said, in that we're not trying, in the previous goal, we heard as much about process. We heard more about process than we did costs, in my recollection. And we're limiting it to costs now in the title. I think I would like to broaden that. I would like to change goal 3. And then if we want to add, I would be supportive of adding a sustainability component.
It's really about sustainable process.
I think goal 3 is, and if we don't want to use the word sustainable because we think it gets commingled with the environment, I'm fine with that. But we do, the message I heard from the developers that we spoke to was, there's not a great process in Edina. And it leads to increased costs for building through multiple reviews.
Right.
So if that's what we heard, that's what we should say. That's what I would like it to say, not focusing on costs. I think that's too narrow. And then I support adding a sustainability component.
Okay.
I guess I agree with Joe, but I think that with the sustainability, I want to make sure that we're including sustainable components in all of the goals. Like one thing that kind of annoys me about and I feel this way a little bit about equity topics and environmental topics, is that change in the area, we can't isolate it and make it its own separate goal. If it's actually going to be, if we're actually thinking about sustainability from an environmental perspective, it has to be inherent in all of the other goals. If we try to make it separate, then people can pick and choose, and they accomplish 2, and then they don't accomplish goal 3 or 4. And it's like, well, we hit 2 of the 3 goals. I mean, if you actually want to move the needle, it should be interwoven in all of the goals. And I think if you try to set it aside as its own goal, you're setting yourself up to fail. So to me, I like the idea of incorporating it in the development process, because I agree with Dan and Joe that that we could be kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth. And if we don't have an eye towards sustainability and fiscal and process sustainability as the city's making recommendations, we're not gonna really make any substantive change. So to me, it feels like isolating it in its own chapter is, I mean, I think that's fine, I guess, but I think it's more evolutionary if we have sustainable principles incorporated in all of the other goals versus having it separate. If it's in fact to me, it's more of a value and a context thing that needs to be incorporated on a broader spectrum than just as put in low flow toilets and encourage solar panels and stuff like that. I mean, I think okay, that's great, but what else do we do? I mean, and the stuff in that area is constantly changing, and people's values are different. Who's owning the property? Is it a single family home? Is it a commercial property? Is it a rental, condo, whatever? I mean, there's so many variables that I think if you try to set it aside as its own thing, it's going to be very hard to accomplish it.
So Bernadette, are you guys familiar with PepsiCo and Indira Nooyi when she incorporated exactly what you're talking about into the strategy of their company?
Multiple times, yes.
I think you're saying exactly, aren't you? I think that's a great idea. It's creating this idea, broadening the use of sustainability and incorporating it in all aspects of the strategy, not just as an environmental strategy.
Okay.
I hate to do this. I have to jump on another meeting in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
And you guys have a lot of momentum. So I'm.
Oh, that's right. I'm at my end too. So
I am also at my end.
Okay.
I think we're at a good stopping point. Steve, I personally would welcome if you have the energy to pull out some things related to sustainability that you see in the comp plan for this group to at least look at and understand how they're approaching it. And then I and everybody else, why don't we think about how to incorporate sustainability as a theme throughout the report as it relates to different goals and strategies.
So, Mayor, what are we also going to focus on next week? Are we going to, because it seems like we should focus on a segment of the chapter.
Yes. So I had sent out one chapter that I'd revisited for people to take a look at. And so I think I will just put that into a clean version for the folder for next week and ask people to do their commenting within that revised chapter. My next activity is to work on the community drivers chapter and then on the state of housing. So I'm going to be working on both of those over the next week before our meeting.
Merritt, can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
So in my mind, the executive summary is probably one of the most critical pieces of pulling all of this report together, right? It's the piece that I think most people are going to go to and read first.
Right.
And shouldn't we start with that and say, hey, this is the framework. This is the foundation of the report, which is the executive summary. And then build it. Would it be easier to build the separate chapters once we had alignment around the executive summary, as opposed to building individual chapters first? And maybe it's just me, but that's how my mind thinks. I would, and I've been looking and spending time and noodling on the table of contents, and I'm happy to share that with people, and I'll do that. But it would help me to do the executive summary first.
Other thoughts on that specifically, or?
Well, summary in my mind is you've done the report and then you go back and summarize the report. So and maybe I'm being too literal here. So I understand what Joe's saying, that it's what most people will focus on because a lot of people don't want to jump into the weeds for a variety of reasons. It's just that as we develop these other chapters, it would seem to me that we might want to keep tweaking that summary. But yeah, I mean, it's important, but is it kind of like putting the tail first?
A good practice that I have seen in other reports is that you write the executive summary, and then as you are continuing to write the rest of the report, you continually hearken back to the executive summary and keep on revising and updating as you go along to keep that focus on what the total goal is.
So it's kind of it's an iterative process.
Absolutely. And so, Joe, I support what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, Norm, that's a good point. And that would so yeah, that's one way to deal with it.
Merritt, just as a housekeeping thing, on the site that has the meeting materials, it seems like we have multiple copies of the same document, and it's a little difficult to find which is the document that you want to direct us to. And so if you could find some way of labeling these more clearly, that would be helpful.
So I think what I suggested last week and trying to move to is you should only ever be looking at and commenting on the documents that I place in the folder for the upcoming week.
But there's 4 copies of one document in the folder right now.
Well,
If I read them correctly.
do you
Yeah.
remember? Okay, so the 4.1, I said I can do this and I can change that. I would show a revised document with the revisions showing. And then I would do a second one that's the same, except all of the revisions are accepted. So it's called a clean copy. And so if you were to pull the file over and look at the end names, you'd see clean next to some of them. So that accounts for 2. And then we have the other issue where some people want